Are you devoted to every student succeeding? Are you ready to dance out of the fog of adoption fairy tales, gypsy myths, fighting spirit? Then this session may offer you portals from which to quantum leap into a state of adoption spirit magic. Welcome to Which to Take with Christina Lisa. Peace, you may call us River, and in this session we are reading a press release from the Roma Antidiscrimination Network released 6th July 2026, and the press release goes something like this. Roma Center warns against a new security logic in the treatment of people living in precarious conditions. With the establishment of a quote-unquote Competence Center for Combating Organized Benefit Fraud on 1 July 2026, and new cooperation structures such as GEKO in North Rhine-Westphalia, social issues are increasingly being addressed through a security policy lens. Instead of strengthening the protection of particularly vulnerable people, the state is expanding its powers of control and intervention. The raid carried out a few days ago in the Duisburg high-rise complex known as the quote-unquote White Giant is another troubling step in this direction. For years, we have observed a fundamental shift in perspective. People who flee the consequences of racism, exclusion, and persecution within Europe, or who live in precarious conditions in Germany, are increasingly no longer perceived as rights holders, but as a security problem. This development is visible not only in individual municipal measures, but increasingly at state and federal level. The state has a responsibility to prosecute organized crime. However, it becomes problematic when entire population groups are placed under general suspicion under the heading of, quote-unquote, benefit fraud. For more than 10 years, we have observed an increasingly repressive approach to supposed social benefit fraud, particularly in North Rhine-Westphalia. Our experience in counseling and support work shows that many measures are not directed at organized crime, but at people who themselves live in precarious circumstances and are often affected by labor exploitation, overpriced and substandard housing, and structural discrimination. The recent raids in the Duisburg, pardon my pronunciation, high-rise complex known as the quote-unquote White Giant are emblematic of this development. However, this is nothing new, particularly in Duisburg. In the Duisburg district of Hochfeld alone, around 800 people have been made homeless through such evictions over the past 5 years. While politicians and authorities speak of combating organized crime, many of those affected experience severe interventions in their everyday lives. Based on our counseling work and reports from affected individuals, we know that families can face existential consequences following such inspections. These consequences do not arise by chance, they are the direct result of administrative action. Even the temporary absence of residents, for example, because they are at work or attending school, can result in them being deregistered by the authorities, their social benefits being stopped, or their entitlement to child benefit being called into question. Families are made homeless, lose their means of subsistence, and children are deregistered from school. The state thereby becomes an actor in the deprivation of rights. It is particularly problematic that state measures often target residents rather than the structures that make their exploitation possible in the first place. Landlords generate substantial profits from inhumane living conditions. Employers exploit the precarious situation of many people, fail to pay agreed wages, or employ people in informal working arrangements. Rather than consistently addressing these forms of organized exploitation, state action often targets those who are affected by it. Roma Center is particularly critical of the expansion of preventative data analysis and the close cooperation between social authorities and law enforcement, especially in the light of the National Socialist persecution of Roma and Sinti. Let me reread that sentence again, please. Thank you. Roma Center is particularly critical of the expansion of preventative data analysis and the close cooperation between social authorities and law enforcement, especially in light of the National Socialist persecution of Roma and Sinti. This persecution was enabled to a significant extent through racist registration and categorization practices and implemented through the cooperation of welfare authorities, police, and other state institutions. Personal data were not collected neutrally, but used for identification, exclusion, deprivation of rights, deportation, and ultimately genocide. The present situation must not be equated with the period of National Socialist persecution. It nevertheless obliges public authorities to ensure that any form of data collection, data matching, and cooperation between social welfare authorities and law enforcement bodies is subject to particularly rigorous safeguards for fundamental rights, protection against discrimination, and protection from racial profiling. For many Roma, state data collection is not an abstract administrative matter, but is connected to a history of state persecution. Since the 1990s, political and media discourse has constructed a narrative of supposed quote-unquote poverty migration. This narrative obscures the actual reasons why many Roma leave their countries of origin. Many people do not leave primarily because of economic poverty, but because of persistent racism, systemic marginalization, violence, and a lack of state protection. Reducing these experiences of flight and migration to economic motives depoliticizes their causes and contributes to the reproduction of racist stereotypes. Terms such as quote-unquote poverty migration and quote-unquote migration into a social welfare systems or quote-unquote EU citizens merely conceal the racist content of the debate. Academic research shows that such terms are often used as linguistic codes. Even where Roma are not explicitly named, the population group being addressed often remains the same. In this way, racist attributions are reproduced without being openly expressed. Experiences from North Rhine-Westphalia also showed that a repressive approach does not solve social problems. Despite years of task forces, inspections, and evictions, neither exploitation nor poverty has disappeared. Instead, those affected lose their homes, their jobs, and often their access to education and social support. Meanwhile, those who profit from these conditions frequently remain untouched. These developments should not be viewed in isolation. Rather, various political measures are converging into a security policy approach that increasingly responds to social issues through public order and security instruments, while leaving the structural causes of people's circumstances untouched. Germany is thereby following a development that we have observed for some time in various Eastern European countries, and which is one of the reasons why Roma flee these countries in the first place. Roma Center therefore calls for a fundamental change in state action. Social policy must not be organized according to security policy priorities. Rather than expanding structures of control and surveillance, fundamental and social rights must be strengthened, exploitation must be effectively addressed, and unlawful practices by state authorities must be consistently reviewed. Let me reread those two sentences. Social policy must not be organized according to security policy priorities. Rather than expanding structures of control and surveillance, fundamental and social rights must be strengthened, exploitation must be effectively addressed, and unlawful practices by state authorities must be consistently reviewed. The central problem is not the misuse of social benefits, but the organized exploitation and deprivation of rights of particularly vulnerable people. Those who focus exclusively on benefit recipients lose sight of those who generate substantial profits from their hardship. Let me read that sentence again, please. Thank you. Those who focus exclusively on benefit recipients lose sight of those who generate substantial profits from their hardship. Especially in times of increasing social polarization, social marginalization, migration, and other consequences of racism must not be framed as security problems. A democratic state governed by the rule of law must combat organized crime without restricting or violating the fundamental and social rights of particularly vulnerable population groups. And that's the end of that press release. And at the bottom it says, the Roma Center is a nationwide migrant self-organization based in Göttingen with a branch in Dortmund. In recent years, Roma Center EV has increasingly worked on security policy issues and co-founded the Global Roma Alliance for Strategic Security in 2025. The Allegiance's aim is to establish the security of Roma as an independent political issue at the European level. The delegation to Brussels in December 2025 marked the first meeting on Roma security held at the European Parliament. And as I was reading that, the Kentler experiment came to mind that was deemed a success to the German Senate in 1988, where they were pairing orphans with certain members of the population who had yet to work through their own molest issues and preferred to take it out on children. And in other words, matching people who enjoyed having sex with children to children, letting them adopt children. And that was deemed a success in 1988, and how around the world that plays out from subtle to outright rape, the Holocaust trickle-down effect. And if you are curious and you want to know more, you can reach out to the Roma Antidiscrimination Network through the information in the cover page or thumbnail of this session. You may also flip through our socials like a stack of tarot. And Dr. Robert Golden Wang of the Golden Dawn Tarot reminds us that the essential purpose of tarot is to teach. And so with that in mind, glory be. Thanks for playing your cards, steering clear of danger, and for taking such sweet care of yourself. Until next time, ciao for now. We love you all.